Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with your hurricane outlook and discussion for Tuesday, July 24th, 2018. Taking a look at the global storm coverage here from the University of Wisconsin site. Nothing in the Atlantic Basin right now, nothing in the Eastern and Central Pacific. All of the activity is confined over here in the West Pac. And this feature right here is responsible, I believe, for the flooding that resulted in the collapse and the failure of that hydropower dam over in Laos, if I read that correctly. This is Tropical Depression 15, and it's going to become a typhoon and maybe a threat to our Japanese friends up here. And then this is Tropical Storm Wukong, and it is no threat to anybody right now. But overall, the point of this particular graphic, globally, the cyclone activity in the tropics anyway, fairly low right now, which is kind of unusual. So let's look at what's happening in the Atlantic Basin. Of course, nothing over the next couple of days. Same is true for the Eastern Pacific, just one area. 30% chance of development, blah, 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 nothing happening, which is great news. Again, I mean, this is all obviously for those who have interest along the coast, anywhere from Cabo to the resort areas, whether you're vacationing or you live there or what have you. Obviously, this is wonderful news. But this time of year, you just never know. And we're heading into a pattern. It does look like once we get into the middle and latter part of August, that things will be on the uptick globally, and probably for the Western Hemisphere even more so than elsewhere. But we'll get to that later, not today because it's just too far out in time, but I'm seeing some hints of it, put it that way, that the quietness will eventually come to an end, but it's going to be a little while longer. In the meantime, we do have heat over here still in parts of the west and Texas and points west from there. Is Texas considered the west? I guess not, since this is the Midwest, but you get the idea. This upper level low and the trough carved out, bringing tons of moisture up to the Carolinas, through the Carolinas, into the mid-Atlantic states. And this flood threat up here in the areas that I'm outlining is significant, especially, as I mentioned yesterday, for areas that have elevation, and you take the effects of gravity with lots of water into account, and you can have some serious problems. So, make sure you are weather aware, and I'm not kidding about that. It's not trivial. I mean, just think of flash flooding and how horrific that can be, and be sure that you know what's happening. That is an impressive plume of moisture streaming up out of the tropics over, the source area, very warm water temperatures, 28, 29 Celsius. That'll do it. Another upper level low spinning out here, some convective activity with it. Maybe a little surprised that there was no mention at all in the Hurricane Center's outlook, just to say what it is or what it isn't doing. But, sometimes these upper level lows, when they sit for a while, can work their way down to the surface, but I don't see any indication of that in the global computer models. Interestingly enough, we've had some northerly flow over this area. Obviously, you have this huge mound of high pressure out here, and the clockwise flow around it, and then you got this trough carved out here. So you've had this northerly flow, and I noticed that the water temperatures around the northern Gulf Coast have cooled off maybe a degree Celsius. So instead of the 30 Celsius covering everything up here, you've got this one area up here that's like 29. It's trivial because the Gulf is definitely warm and plenty of heat content, but that northerly flow can do some interesting things, and it moves the warmer water away, and just the air flowing over the top of the water like that. Think about blowing across the top of a cup of soup that's too hot, or a hot cup of coffee. You're chilling it off just enough to be able to sip it without burning your tongue or the roof of your mouth. But nothing of concern with this cluster of storms except for oil interest out there, lightning and maybe some water spouts. It's too bad we don't see more pictures of such phenomenon with all the people that work out there. I bet there's some amazing stories. Story for another day. Out in the eastern Atlantic, we're going to visit this in more detail in a moment. Some interesting things that this suggests, even though it is not going to develop. Looking in the eastern, we're going to look at it now. Eastern Pacific's coming up. I forgot the order of my slides today, or my tabs, as it were. So that tropical wave has put a huge dent in the Saharan air layer, and now probably progressive pieces of energy coming off. We're going to see less and less Saharan air influence out here, and it's going to be starting to come off farther to the north. Further to the north, whatever. I'm never going to get away from that. It's my nemesis. We need to, you know what we need to do for the phone a friend one day is phone an English expert at a university, an English professor. Anyhow, these SAL outbreaks will start emanating more to the north. There, and that's how I can avoid saying further and farther. And this has definitely put a big dent, but it's still, only late July, and it's not time yet for this area to really do anything. And I believe that the coolness out here of the sea surface temperatures will prevent much from happening here. It's going to be farther to the west. I know that's correct because we're talking distance there, that we have to worry about things. But again, that's still probably a few weeks away. Now to the shear chart. I just wanted to show you this. Somebody mentioned showing what's happening with the shear on the YouTube comments yesterday. And as promised, here you go. So what are we looking at? What's what? First of all, let me change my color over here to blue. So here, let's start up in Maine and Massachusetts, and then the mid-Atlantic states. There's the Carolinas, Florida. I just want to make sure you know what you're looking at. And then we go around the Bay of Campeche, Central America, the Isthmus of Panama, down through the northern part of South America. Here's your Lesser Antilles, Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, and Cuba. All right? And we won't leave out our good friends in Jamaica. And so what are we looking at? Well, basically, now we'll go back to white. All of this red color in here is representative of upper level winds that are too strong. And the green, this is pretty simple. Green generally means go, and red means stop. All right, so most of the Atlantic basin over here is consumed in this red color, and I have scribbled all over it, so let's get rid of it all. But strong upper level winds across the Caribbean. The eastern Atlantic out here is not too bad. The upper level winds somewhat supportive, but it's dry out here in the mid levels. The ocean temperatures are cooler. They're not even 26 degrees Celsius far enough north. And so I'm really starting to think, again, just kind of hinting on this once more, that we're going to have to wait for systems to get west of 50 longitude before they start to develop. But this area is probably going to be somewhat of a graveyard. And we'll talk about that a lot more, though. I'm looking at some stuff, watching what other people are saying, and there's some big puzzle pieces that may be starting to come together. And I'm not just teasing you here. I don't have enough info to really make any kind of a guess as to when we're going to see activity perk up. And I don't want to have any, not misleading, but I want to make sure I know what I'm talking about and that it's not a false alarm in the modeling. But what we do know is generally once we get to the middle and latter part of August, the winds out here relax overall. The stronger upper level winds get pulled more to the north up here. And then it's a matter of, do we have seedlings, tropical waves, etc.? What are the water temperatures like? What's the moisture profile of the atmosphere like? And we're looking at all that. Me and a bunch of other people, trust me. And with Twitter and message groups elsewhere, forums like Storm 2K and the KHOU Weather Board, etc., Gulf Coast Weather, you name it. Think about all the people that look at this so you can go in and kind of crowdsource a consensus of when things might happen and where they might happen, and we're just not there yet. Signs are coming, but they're trickling in. All right, so now the East Pack animation, and this is interesting because it kind of shows you, we know for a fact that the water temperatures in this area are definitely warmer than they are in the Atlantic main development region, and as such, there's just more overall convection. But for whatever reason, nothing seems to be blossoming. We've got this grapevine, if you will, sitting out here, and you got some decent looking grapes on it, right? But they're just not doing anything, and I don't really know the reason why. It's just generally suppressed. The upward motion just isn't there. There's just not that kick. And Dr. Michael Ventris talked about that with the convectively coupled Kelvin wave interview that we did a number of weeks back. There's just a lot of factors. You can have warm water and disturbances like we're looking at here, and nothing develops. And sometimes you just don't know why, and that's fine. We leave it. All right, so let me just show you this. The next 7 days in the Atlantic at the 850 millibar level. Let's use red or orange, whatever. There's the outline, I guess it is red, of the big old ridge. There's the outline of this trough that even, showing up nicely at 5,000 feet, which is 850 millibars in the atmosphere. And then over here you can just barely make out the eastern side of the big ridge that's sitting over the west, and keeping it hot there. And in between is all that moisture, of course. So let's put this into motion and watch what happens over the next week. First of all, no areas of disturbed weather coming out into the tropical Atlantic here. It's nice and dry. None of these disturbances or vorticity are really amounting to much, so that shows me generally going to be quiet for the next 7 days. In the meantime, the big old Bermuda Azores high out here, flexing, waxing, waning, and then finally, as this progresses, you see the heights up here building. We don't have it dipping down into the U.S. like that as much. And so let's just go to that last frame, and I'll show you. So at the last frame a week out, look up here. See, it's much more zonal. And by zonal, I mean, west to east instead of coming in and dropping like that. So there's less troughiness at the day 7 time period. So zonal flow up here with all your disturbances rolling across like bowling balls, and along the highway, and then down south in the subtropics, there's your subtropical high. Expansive, moving westward, building into the southeast, which means hot and humid coming up for you. And then at the end of that time period, at 7 days out, look at what we got. One little area. Oops, the old arrow came back. One little area to watch here, but that's a week away. But hey, that's getting into the first part of August. I also want to show you this. This is the Western Pacific, and this is a little higher up in the atmosphere. It's not the Western Pacific, it's the whole Pacific. This is 500 millibars in the atmosphere, and we're seeing vorticity, these little balls of energy here, or spin in the atmosphere. And this currently is the tropical storm Wukong, I guess is what it's called. And then these big circles here, this is that huge heat ridge centered, roughly right there, right? And, the jet stream up here, the westerly winds, etc. And then there's that lower height indicated right there in the eastern U.S. Ridge sitting out here over Hawaii, ridge over here to the east of Japan. And Japan, where's Japan? Right here. All right, so keep your eye on Japan as I put this into motion and watch the next, I think this is 5 days. All right, so typhoon or tropical storm Wukong, whatever, it heads out. But then here's that next one, number 15, and it should develop and pinwheel around, and it might come back here. This is the end of the 5 days, and maybe affect Japan. The longer range modeling suggests that. So maybe a typhoon impact for Japan up in some of the populated areas. Notice, for what it's worth, if I can draw a straight line, there's Cape Hatteras right there. And that's, I think, 36 degrees latitude right across. Wait a minute, I lost it. That's probably 38 right there, I'm guessing. That's a pretty good straight line. Hatteras and Tokyo are almost at the same latitude, for what it's worth, all right? And so this would be like something coming up and then pinwheeling back in towards Cape Hatteras, but on the other side of the globe, of course. So we're going to watch this fairly closely for our friends in Japan. And depending, if it's nothing brewing in the Atlantic, and if I don't know. I'm just going to keep an eye on it. Is this going to be the first trip that Mark makes for a typhoon? Stay tuned. We shall see. We'll just leave it at that. Some intrigue for you. I am wanting to branch out, but I have to pick the right one. And I think Japan wouldn't be too bad. Going into Taiwan the first time, or, mainland China, I know zero Chinese, probably even less Japanese if there's a way to do so. But I think that I could manage in Japan better than I could the first time out in Taiwan or mainland China, and maybe I could hook up with somebody like James Reynolds. Who knows? It's just speculation. So I'll watch that and see how it develops, and we'll go from there. Alrighty, that's it for me for today. Thanks for tuning in. As always, I do appreciate it. I am Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. I'll have more for you tomorrow.